On the 52nd floor of a glass tower that pierced the Manhattan skyline, arrogance walked in an expensive suit. Victor Harrington, a self-made millionaire who believed wealth equaled wisdom, lounged behind his black granite desk. The air reeked not of perfume, but of power, cold, metallic, and cutting. For 8 long years, Amelia Brooks had worked silently as the company's janitor, her footsteps muffled by carpets thicker than her entire week's wages. She never raised her voice, never looked too long at the walls lined with paintings. Worth more than her neighborhood. She had survived by being invisible. But today, she did not come alone. By her side stood her daughter, Naomi Brooks, a thin 12-year-old with polished shoes and a backpack that carried more books than food. Naomi's eyes darted across the room, not with fear, but with a quiet hunger to see the world her mother had been denied. Victor circled them. Like a predator, his laughter sharp as broken glass. 8 years here, Amelia, and still scrubbing floors. What did you study? Oh, that's right, barely a high school diploma. His words were daggers wrapped in silk. Then he turned to the girl, his smirk widening. And this is your little dreamer. Tell me, child, do you imagine these halls were built for someone with your skin to climb? Amelia lowered her gaze, shame pressing on her like the weight of the tower itself. She had swallowed such cruelty for years. But Naomi did not. She lifted her chin, her small frame steady as stone. The room stilled. Her voice, clear and unwavering, sliced through the arrogance that filled the air. I speak 9 languages, she declared. Victor's laugh exploded, metallic and hollow, echoing off marble walls like a cruel joke. But behind the mockery, a flicker of unease crossed his face. The game he thought he controlled was about to shift, though he could not yet see how. For the first time in years, on the floor, where wealth silenced truth, a child's words rang louder than money. Victor Harrington leaned back in his chair, a cruel smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. His hand swept across the desk, scattering a stack of yellowed pages that smelled faintly of dust and history. Since you enjoy pretending, he said with mocking grandeur, let's play a little game. This manuscript, he tapped the fragile parchment with his manicured finger, was purchased from an auction in Paris last month. 5 of the most accomplished translators in New York examined it. All failed. They called it impossible, a linguistic labyrinth. 6 ancient languages, each flowing into the next, a puzzle meant to trap the unworthy. Now tell me, Naomi Brooks, if you really think knowledge is your inheritance, why don't you show us what these PhDs could not? Amelia froze, her hands tightening on the handle of the supply cart. She wanted to beg her daughter to stay silent, to keep her head down. For 8 years she had endured this man's arrogance because silence was survival. But Naomi didn't shrink. Instead, her small fingers brushed the edge of the manuscript, her eyes scanning the faded ink like rivers winding across a map. She didn't rush. You mock my mother for not being educated, Naomi said softly, and you mock me for daring to dream. But tell me, Mr. Harrington, can you read this manuscript? The question stung. Victor's face flushed. I'm a businessman, not a translator, he snapped. Then you can't read it either, Naomi replied steadily. And yet you laugh at those who cannot. Money isn't proof of intelligence. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time in years, Amelia lifted her eyes. Her daughter was not trembling. She was unyielding. Victor tried to cover his falter with louder laughter, harsh and metallic. A poor child from a DMATE public school claiming she knows more than scholars? Ridiculous. You expect me to believe you can read this? Naomi did not flinch. I speak 9 languages, she repeated. If you doubt me, test me. Victor crossed his arms. Name them. Spanish native. English advanced. French intermediate. Portuguese fluent. German, conversational. Russian basic. Mandarin basic. Arabic conversational. Italian basic. Each word fell with precision, each accent crisp, undeniable. She ticked them off one by one, on her fingers, as if she were reciting multiplication tables. Victor's forced laughter rang again, but it faltered halfway, like glass cracking under strain. Words are cheap, he sneered. Prove it. Naomi nodded and placed both palms gently on the manuscript. The pages were fragile, but her voice was strong. She began to read aloud, and the air in the room shifted as though something ancient had been summoned. From her lips spilled the sharp, elegant strokes of classical Chinese tones rising and falling. like brushstrokes on silk. Without pause, her voice melted into Arabic, melodic and fluid, curling like calligraphy. Sanskrit followed, heavy and resonant, each syllable weighted like stone. Then came the guttural cadence of ancient Hebrew, the poetic lilt of Persian, and the solemn rhythms of medieval Latin, every tongue distinct, every phrase clear, weaving into a seamless river of meaning. The office, that once echoed only with the sound of arrogance, now vibrated with something Victor could not purchase. Wisdom carried across centuries. Victor's jaw slackened. His marble office, his paintings worth millions, his watch flashing. Under the lights, all of it seemed suddenly trivial. Before him stood not a scholar with accolades, nor a businessman with wealth, but a 12-year-old girl from a working-class family, who carried 9 languages in her small frame like lanterns in the dark. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming. She had seen Naomi do homework. Under the dim flicker of a cheap bulb, practicing phrases whispered by immigrants who taught night classes at the library. Now, she watched her daughter elevate those lessons into a power greater than wealth. Naomi lifted her head. "Shall I translate the meaning for you?" Victor swallowed, his arrogance thinning into unease. "Yes," he muttered, not from pride, but from a place deep within that had not spoken in years. Naomi's voice was steady. "The manuscript speaks of the nature of wisdom and wealth. It says, true wisdom is not found in palaces of gold, but in a humble heart. True wealth is not counted in money, but in the ability to see dignity in every person. True power does not humiliate, it lifts others up." The words pierced like arrows, not because they were loud, but because they were true. Victor's defenses charts, jargon, numbers, suddenly seemed as small as ants crawling in circles. Naomi continued, "The manuscript teaches in 3 layers. First, instruction, whoever thinks they are above others, because of money is the poorest of all. Second, metaphor. Language is like a river, changing names as it flows through different lands, but always water. People too. Change in skin, jobs, or wealth, but remain human. Their dignity never changes. Third, choice. The powerful awaken only when they realize they've been blind to the wisdom around them, or they condemn themselves to emptiness." Victor gripped the edge of his desk. The cold stone no longer offered him safety. The office, once his throne, now felt like a prison lined with golden handcuffs. Naomi's words were not an attack, they were a mirror. And for the first time, Victor Harrington was forced to look. He tried to laugh again, but the sound died in his throat. All he could say was, I am sorry." The words felt heavy, unnatural, but also necessary. Amelia stared at him in disbelief. In 8 years, no one in this tower had ever apologized to her. But Naomi shook her head gently. "Words are not enough. Actions matter. If you truly want to change, there must be conditions. But first, do you see now? Money does not make you wise. Power does not make you strong. Dignity does." Victor lowered his gaze. The arrogance that had armored him for decades cracked, replaced by something raw and uncertain. The marble office felt smaller, not because it had shrunk, but because a child had grown taller within it, not in height, but in truth. For the first time, the balance of power on the 52nd floor had shifted. And it was not the millionaire who held it. It was the girl with 9 languages, and the courage to use them. The silence that hung in the marble office was unlike any silence Victor Harrington had ever endured. It wasn't the silence of obedience, the kind that fell when subordinates lowered their heads before his orders. This silence was heavier, deeper, born not from fear, but from truth. Naomi Brooks, only 12 years old, stood unshaken where CEOs, politicians, and shareholders had once stumbled before Victor's mocking tongue. Amelia Brooks, her mother, dared not breathe. For 8 long years she had survived in this tower by shrinking herself, by allowing insults to glide past like sharp knives she never acknowledged. But today, her daughter had spoken words that cut sharper than wealth ever could. Victor forced himself to swallow the humiliation clogging his throat. "I am sorry," he muttered again, each syllable jagged like broken glass. He turned toward Amelia, his voice faltering. "I should not have." Naomi lifted her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Words alone are not enough, Mr. Harrington. If you truly want to change, your apology must live in action, not just sound." Victor stiffened. He wasn't accustomed to being told what to do, least of all by a child. Yet, something in Naomi's gaze held him captive. Her eyes weren't filled with anger or pride, but with a calm steadiness that made resistance feel hollow. You want action? Victor asked, half defiant, half desperate. What would that look like? Naomi inhaled deeply. Her voice, though soft, carried with the weight of command. 3 conditions. Fulfill them, and your apology may begin to mean something. Victor frowned. 3 conditions? From you? Yes, Naomi answered simply. If you refuse, then your sorry is nothing more than another lie in a long line of lies. For the first time in years, Victor Harrington felt smaller than the space he occupied. His paintings, his chandeliers, his golden pen on the desk, they all seemed like props in a theater, stripped bare by a girl with nothing but truth. He nodded once, cautiously. Say them. Naomi raised her first finger. Condition 1. You will apologize to my mother properly. Not with half words, not while hiding behind your desk. You will say her full name, Amelia Brooks, and you will look her in the eye as you admit that for 8 years you treated her as invisible, less than human. Until you do that, every word you say means nothing. Victor's throat tightened. To say the name of a janitor as if she were an equal felt like lowering himself in ways he had never dared. Yet Naomi's gaze offered no escape. Slowly, he turned toward Amelia. Amelia Brooks, he said, each word deliberate, heavier than the last. I am sorry. I am sorry. For never seeing you as a person. For humiliating you in front of others. For never asking about your life. For treating you as though your name, your dignity, did not matter. Amelia's breath caught. Her hands trembled, but she stood tall. She did not forgive, not yet. But for the first time in 8 years, she had been called by her name with respect. That alone was a fracture in the wall of silence that had trapped her. Naomi raised her second finger. Condition 2. You must use your power for something beyond yourself. You will create scholarships for children from working families. 150 to begin with. Not a plain 7 token number for good publicity, but enough to truly change lives. You will fund free language programs at the New York Public Library, so others like me can learn from teachers who are overlooked, people like Mr. Ahmed, Mrs. Wong, or Miss Rossi. You will also build real career paths for service workers inside your company, so that hidden talent doesn't remain locked behind cleaning carts and mop buckets. Victor blinked. The weight of her demand struck harder than any shareholder's ultimatum. His mind instinctively calculated cost, ROI, shareholder reactions. Yet before he could speak, Naomi cut in. Do not ask about profit. Ask about responsibility. If you claim to change, this is how you prove it. Victor's mouth opened, then shut. For the first time, he did not argue. His nod was slow, but genuine. And the third condition? He asked, his voice quieter. Naomi lifted her last finger. Condition 3. You will learn a new language yourself. Mandarin, to be specific. Not in a private class with champagne, not in some boardroom with leather chairs. Every Tuesday after work, you will sit at a wooden table in the public library with me as your teacher. No VIP rooms, no assistants, just a notebook, a pencil, and humility. Only then will you understand what it feels like to begin from zero, as so many of us do. The words struck him deeper than he expected. To learn under the guidance of a child? To sit among ordinary people at wooden tables? To mispronounce, to stumble, to be corrected? His pride screamed in protest. Yet another voice, smaller, buried, but undeniable, whispered that perhaps this was the lesson he needed most. Victor exhaled slowly. He looked at Naomi, then at Amelia, then back at the manuscript still lying open on the desk. I agree, he said, his voice stripped of its usual armor. All 3. I will do them. Naomi studied his eyes, searching for sincerity. Victor did not look away. For years, he had bought, mocked, and commanded his way through life. Now, he found himself bending to the moral discipline of a 12-year-old girl. Strangely, it did not feel like defeat. It felt like the first step toward freedom. Naomi lowered her hand. Then we begin. Next Tuesday, 7 o'clock. The New York Public Library. Bring a notebook with grid lines and a pencil. We'll start with the 4 tones of Mandarin. Until then, remember, change is not declared. It is practiced. Victor almost laughed, not out of mockery, but out of the sheer absurdity of his situation. Just minutes ago, he had sneered at the idea of a poor child daring to dream. Now he was her student. His laughter, for once, carried no arrogance, only a hint of shame, and perhaps the fragile seed of humility. As Amelia and Naomi pushed their cart toward the door, the sound of its wheels no longer disappeared into the thick carpet. Instead, it seemed to echo, as though the weight of the room had shifted. Victor Harrington stood alone in his tower, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had just been told the truth. For the first time in his life, he understood that real wealth was not measured in watches or paintings, but in the ability to say someone's name with respect, and to begin again as a learner. The following weeks marked the slow unraveling of Victor Harrington's empire of arrogance. For years, his company had been a monument to profit above all else, where workers were faceless tools and executives polished numbers while silencing voices. But after the confrontation on the 52nd floor, a seed had been planted, one that Naomi Brooks watered with truth and courage. The first sign of change came quietly. An internal memo announced a new initiative. The Brooks Scholarship Program, providing 150 full scholarships for children from working families. The announcement rippled through the company. Some employees whispered in disbelief, others cried in break rooms where they had never expected to be acknowledged. For janitors, cafeteria workers, and security staff, the words education and opportunity no longer belonged only to shareholders' children. But Victor did not stop there. With Naomi's conditions etched into his conscience, he authorized the creation of career ladders for service employees. No longer would cleaners remain invisible in corridors. They would be offered training programs, night classes funded by the company, and pathways into supervisory and administrative roles. Amelia Brooks, herself, the woman once mocked and ignored, was appointed as the director of people development. Her first day in the new office was unlike anything she could have imagined. No longer pushing a cart, she stood before a room of executives, speaking in plain words. Respect begins with names, she said firmly. For 8 years, I was the cleaning lady. Not Amelia. Not Brooks. Just a shadow. That ends now. We will listen, we will name, and we will create opportunities that lift, not crush. Some executives bristled at the audacity of a former janitor standing at the head of a table, but others, silently, nodded. They had felt the unease of the old culture too. Victor, for the first time, did not dominate the room. He sat at the side, taking notes. He was no longer the unquestioned voice of authority, but a student learning from the very people he once belittled. Parallel to these changes, Naomi took her role as teacher seriously. Every Tuesday evening, she sat across from Victor at a wooden table in the New York Public Library. She corrected his tones patiently as he stumbled over Mandarin syllables. Ma. 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 She repeated. Victor, once accustomed to boardrooms, where his words shaped markets, now sweated over the difference between rising and falling tones. Other students at the library, immigrants, teenagers, parents glanced at him curiously. For them, he was not a billionaire, just another beginner with a pencil and a notebook. And when he mispronounced, they chuckled not cruelly, but with the kindness of shared struggle. For Victor, it was a new kind of wealth, the wealth of humility. The library sessions grew into something larger. Naomi invited her teachers, Mr. Ahmed, once a professor of Arabic literature now driving a cab, and Mrs. Wang, a former department head in Beijing, to share their knowledge. Soon, Sullivan Tech employees began joining Tuesday sessions. Then came neighbors, parents, and service workers. What began as Victor's punishment blossomed into a community language commons, where everyone regardless of title sat side by side to learn. But change is never without resistance. At the exclusive Summit Club, where Victor once drank wine with hedge fund managers and telecom moguls, whispers turned into sneers. You're throwing away your legacy, one scoffed. All this talk of scholarships and janitors, what are you trying to prove? That you've gone soft. Another laughed over cigars. You're learning Mandarin at the library? What's next, bowing to street vendors? The old Victor would have laughed along, feeding on their approval. But now, the laughter of the Summit Club sounded hollow, compared to the genuine warmth he found at the library tables. When pressed to choose, he stood. Gentlemen, keep your circle, he said quietly. I found a new one. And with that, he walked away from the club that had once defined his status. The media took notice. Some praised the reforms as groundbreaking. Others derided them as performative wokeness. But Victor did not hide. He faced criticism head-on, replying in one Interview. If doing the right thing makes shareholders nervous, then perhaps they should reconsider what kind of wealth they value. Inside the company, the changes deepened. Listening circles were introduced, meetings where employees of all levels sat in equal chairs to share moments when they felt invisible. A security guard confessed he had been called "Hey, you" for 3 years without anyone learning his name. An engineer admitted he mocked accents in meetings, never realizing the pain it caused. Through tears, laughter, and raw honesty, the company began to confront its hidden wounds. Amelia moderated these circles with calm authority, while Naomi often asked the piercing questions. "When did you feel unseen?" she would begin. And suddenly, silence gave way to stories, and stories gave way to empathy. For the first time, the company was not just producing profits, it was producing healing. Still, the road was steep. Financial analysts wrote biting articles about Victor sacrificing margins for morality. Rivals mocked him for elevating a janitor to director. Yet within Sullivan Tech, loyalty deepened. Productivity rose, accidents decreased, and turnover dropped. Employees, once silent, now felt invested in something greater than paychecks. And in the community, the impact multiplied. The scholarships opened doors for children who had never dared to dream of higher education. Library classes grew crowded. Service workers began shifting into new roles, some even becoming mentors to the very scholarship students, who reminded them of their younger selves. Victor's marble office no longer hung with cold paintings. In their place were photographs of real people. Amelia leading a listening session, Naomi correcting his tones at the library, scholarship students holding their acceptance letters. It was no longer the empire of one man's arrogance. It had become the ecosystem of many voices. Victor Harrington had lost the Summit Club. But in return, he had gained something infinitely greater. A community that believed in dignity, in names spoken correctly, and in opportunities multiplied. For the first time in his life, Victor did not feel like the richest man in the room. He felt like a man finally learning how to live with wealth that mattered. Change, Victor Harrington soon learned, did not arrive without resistance. For every scholarship awarded, for every worker promoted from janitor to supervisor, there were whispers of discontent echoing in boardrooms, headlines dripping with scorn, and employees too afraid to let go of the old order. The first blow came from within. An anonymous message appeared on the company's internal chat system. "Tuesday, Mandarin with the janitor's kid. Mandatory yet?" The words were not profane, but they were poisoned with contempt. Victor read the message late at night, sitting at his desk with Naomi's grid-lined notebook open beside him. For a moment, the old reflex tugged at him, to brush it off, to delete the comment, to pretend it didn't matter. But Naomi's voice echoed in his mind. "Words aren't enough. Actions matter." The next morning, he posted a response under his own name. "We don't mandate language learning. We mandate respect. And anyone who refers to a child as the janitor's kid has forgotten how to speak about people. Relearn the language of dignity, or relearn it outside this company." The message went viral inside Sullivan Tech. Some employees applauded. Others muttered that their CEO had grown too sensitive, but Victor did not delete the arguments. Instead, he doubled down, scheduling 2 more listening circles that very week. Amelia facilitated. Naomi asked piercing questions, and skeptical voices were given a seat. The debates were messy, but they were real, and slowly, walls began to crack. Then came the second blow from outside. A finance blog ran a scathing headline: "Harrington Tech goes woke. CEO learns Mandarin. At public library, elevates janitor to management." The article mocked Amelia's appointment, framed the scholarships as pandering, and questioned Naomi's ability to speak 9 languages at all. The comment section dripped with venom. Anonymous users scoffed, "Prove it, girl." Others sneered at her skin, her age, her family background. The cruelty of it all threatened to overwhelm Amelia, who had spent her life shielding her daughter from precisely this kind of that B6 scorn. But Naomi did not flinch. "If they demand proof," she told her mother calmly, "they don't want truth, they want a circus. And knowledge is not a circus." Still, the pressure mounted. Investors grew restless. Executives worried about brand damage. Reporters stalked the library, hungry for spectacle. The breaking point arrived one Monday morning when Victor was pulled from a shareholders' meeting with urgent whispers. In the lobby, the Lucia Brooks scholarship poster bearing Naomi's smiling face had been defaced with black marker. Across the image, someone had scrawled, "Stay in your lane." A crude drawing sat beside it, unmistakably mocking both race and class. Security was flustered. Employees gathered in uneasy clusters. Amelia stood pale but unyielding, her chin high despite the insult. And then Naomi arrived. She stared at the poster for a long, silent moment. To Amelia's surprise, she didn't cry. Instead, she pulled out her phone, snapped a photo, and turned to the crowd. "We do two things," she said, her voice clear. "One, we erase it. Filth doesn't get to linger on a wall of opportunity. Two, we don't erase in silence. We name what happened, and we remember." Victor stepped forward, his own anger simmering. He called the janitorial staff, brought cleaning supplies, and placed a portable speaker on the floor. "Everyone," he announced, "this attack is against Amelia Brooks, against Naomi Brooks, and against every person who believes education is a right. We do not retaliate with hate, but there will be consequences." The cameras were checked. Within an hour, the culprit stepped forward, a mid-level manager, his face tight with guilt. I did it," he stammered. "I was angry. The company's changing too fast. I didn't mean to insult her skin." Amelia's voice was steady. "Lack of intent does not erase impact. You feared losing ground, but your ground was built on pushing others down." Victor suspended the man for 3 weeks without pay, required him to attend 3 listening sessions, and demanded a public apology, one that Amelia and Naomi would have to deem sincere before he could return. Trembling, the man turned toward Amelia. "I am sorry," he said quietly. For the first time, he looked her in the eye. Amelia gave a small nod. "I hear you." Together, employees scrubbed the poster clean. But Victor gave an unusual order. "Do not replace it. Frame it. Keep the stains faintly visible. Add a caption. Defaced. Restored. Stain kept to remember." And below it, list the names of those who scrubbed it, including .r.or. The man who confessed. The framed poster hung in the lobby the next day. Visitors asked about it. Employees pointed to it. And slowly, it became a symbol not of shame, but of resilience. A scare left on purpose, to remind everyone that dignity must be protected daily, not assumed once. What happened next surprised even the harshest critics. Instead of collapsing, the company grew stronger. Service staff turnover dropped, dramatically, by more than a third. Workplace accidents fell after new training and schedule adjustments. Productivity stabilized, not because employees worked harder, but because they worked with dignity. Departments that had been plagued with tension now reported higher morale. Internal surveys showed a sharp increase in employees feeling seen and valued. The results reached the shareholders. At the next quarterly meeting, Victor stood before them, not with glossy PR slides, but with data. Yes, costs rose, he admitted. Scholarships, library, programs, training. They are not cheap. But turnover dropped. Retention improved. The applicant pool doubled because people want to work where dignity matters. If you want numbers, measure again in 6 months. I'm betting on people. The room shifted. Some frowned. Others nodded. For the first time, even skeptical voices were forced to acknowledge the evidence. Later that evening, Victor returned to the library, where Naomi waited at wooden table number 12. He placed the framed photo of the defaced poster on the table beside his notebook. I kept it, he said quietly. The stain. It reminds me that correction is never finished. Naomi smiled faintly. That's the lesson, Mr. Harrington. Scars aren't to be hidden, they're to be remembered, so we don't wound again. For Victor, it was the moment of true affirmation, not that the company had improved, not that numbers had shifted, but that a child had taught him the wisdom he had sought in boardrooms for decades. The defaced poster, framed in the company's lobby, became more than a reminder of a wound. It became the cornerstone of a movement. From that scar, something larger began to grow. Months after the scandal, Victor Harrington stood not in his office but at the New York Public Library auditorium, flanked by Amelia and Naomi. There, he announced the creation of the Naomi Brooks Foundation for Human Dignity, seeded with $500 million of his personal wealth. Unlike Sullivan Tech, the foundation was independent, managed by an independent board of librarians, educators, and community leaders. With Amelia as its First Executive Director. This foundation, Victor said, his voice steady, will not carry my company's logo. It will carry names, the names of students, families, and workers who deserve opportunity. Wealth is not real until it multiplies into the lives of others. The foundation's mission was simple yet radical. Scholarships for students from working class families, community language programs, and career pathways for service employees. Within months, 12 libraries across New York launched evening classes, Mandarin on Tuesdays with Mrs. Wong, Arabic on Thursdays with Dr. Ahmed, and Italian on weekends with Miss Rossi. Service employees, parents, and children sat shoulder to shoulder, pencils in hand, learning not just vocabulary, but the dignity of being heard. Inside Harrington Tech, culture was reshaped around what Naomi had once demanded: respect in action. Out of the listening circles emerged a company-wide code known as the 3-sentence rule. Say the right name. Listen responsibly. Empower to multiply. The rule appeared on posters, in handbooks, even engraved on small wooden plaques in every meeting room. It was simple enough to remember, yet powerful enough to transform interactions. When missteps happened, and they still did, employees used the 3-sentence formula to correct each other. Instead of escalation, there was accountability. Instead of shame, there was growth. 1 year after Naomi first stood in Victor's office, the impact was measurable. The foundation had awarded over 300 scholarships, each tied to 10 volunteer hours a month at the library or mentoring programs. Service staff at the company completed career training modules, and dozens had already earned certifications. Moving from custodial work into safety, logistics, and operations roles. Amelia, once invisible, now traveled across cities to speak about the program, her voice carrying the authority of lived truth. I was called the cleaning lady for 8 years, she told a crowd in Philadelphia. Today, I am called by my name. And more important than my name are the names of the hundreds of families who are finally being seen. Naomi herself continued to teach. Every Tuesday, Victor sat dutifully at table 12, notebook open, stumbling over Mandarin tones, while Naomi corrected him with patient firmness. Sometimes, scholarship students joined, laughing together at his mistakes. And yet, he returned week after week, because humility had become his discipline. The ripple effect spread. Other companies began experimenting with listening circles and mentorship ladders. Universities partnered with the foundation to offer credit for community language classes. What started with one girl's courage now threaded through entire neighborhoods, cities, and institutions. Looking back after a year, Victor wrote in his notebook: humiliation, education, action, multiplication. 4 steps that had reshaped his life, his company, and his city. The marble tower on the 52nd floor no longer defined him. The wooden tables of the library did. And for hundreds of families whose children now carried scholarships. For service workers, whose names were finally spoken with respect. For a community that gathered around words instead of walls, the legacy was no longer Victor's alone. It belonged to all who chose to multiply dignity. A year after the first confrontation on the 52nd floor, the marble desk, where arrogance once ruled, was gone. In its place stood a round wooden table, plain, unadorned, but alive with stories. On the walls were no longer lifeless paintings but photographs of real people. Service workers turned managers, scholarship students clutching acceptance letters, and a young girl guiding a billionaire through Mandarin tones at the library. Victor Harrington, once a man who believed wealth equaled wisdom, had learned the opposite. True wisdom had not come from charts or profits, but from humility, admitting he was wrong, stumbling through new words, listening instead of commanding. He discovered that knowledge outlasts money, dignity outshines luxury, and strength is measured not by how high you climb, but by how many you lift with you. And at the center of it all was Naomi Brooks, just 13 years old, whose voice had shattered the silence of prejudice and pride. She proved that courage is not a matter of age or status. A child with 9 languages had taught a man of millions that dignity must be practiced every day, not as a slogan, but as a habit. The framed poster in the company lobby still bore faint stains from the day it was defaced. It was kept deliberately, a scar to remind everyone that injustice never disappears in silence. Correction is never finished. Every meeting, every scholarship, every listening circle was another step toward ensuring that no one in the building ever felt invisible again. This story reminds us of something profound. your true wealth is not what you keep, but what you share. The greatest strength is not in standing tallest, but in lifting others so they can stand beside you. And dignity, it isn't something granted by status or wealth. It's something we owe one another, every single day, in the way we speak, listen, and act. So, if this message touched your heart, I invite you, share your thoughts in the comments. What does dignity mean to you? Would you have the courage, like Naomi, to speak truth to power? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that reminds us of the power of humanity over arrogance. Together, let's keep multiplying dignity.